it's AI.
Okay, cool. I thought so.
There are a couple of pictures in this deck where it's like, yeah, that conveys the point. And I just went ahead with it.
Cool.
Rather than spend half an hour trying to get an entirely accurate picture.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have aminals that must settle. Here she is. There she is. And I shall wait for thumbs up from my tech help. Sweet. Guys, there are many Sundays where I am pleased to bring you the word. I'm especially excited about this particular one. Like, especially excited. We're gonna get so nerdy. It's gonna be so much fun. We're gonna look at mathematics. We're gonna look at economics. We're gonna do basic queuing theory, and we're gonna come away with a better appreciation for our Lord and Savior. I want to start with grounding us in the whole point why John is writing this book, and he is writing this book so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. And so when we encounter various passages, we should ask, how does this passage show that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name? Because that's the point of each thing that John put in here. Okay. Let us jump into today's passage, baby girl.
The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords, and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken.
Today we're going to go through this passage and we're going to hit the familiar highlights. And we're going to end with a normal understanding, and we're going to find ourselves a little dissatisfied. And we're going to look at the tapestry, and we're going to find a loose thread. And my proposition is it does not matter which thread is loose. Any one that we pull on would just bear as much fruit. We're going to pull on that thread, and we're going to see what happens, and we're going to come away amazed. And so let us start on the initial journey. Passover in Jerusalem. Jesus is heading up for this event. So population of Jerusalem at this time, somewhere between 40 and 80,000 people. This was one of the three holidays where people migrated to Jerusalem to celebrate. So the estimate that we've got is somewhere around 400,000 people would have migrated, and so we're going to end up with about 500,000 people in Jerusalem. This does not jive with all of the historical records. Oh my goodness, I spent so much time this week chasing numbers. Josephus, for example, suggests that there were about 2.7 million people. Josephus is known to exaggerate numbers. He likes to do that a lot. We can look at the square footage of Jerusalem, the overall acreage of Jerusalem that would have been habitable, that was not occupied by, say, walls and things, and 2.7 no go. So general consensus among more conservative folks is about 500,000 people. That's what we're going to go with, because being conservative in our numbers is going to make my point so much better than taking inflated numbers. Okay. He likely went up with his disciples. He's picked up 5 so far. He's probably en route with his brothers and also his mom. Okay, so family is heading up to Jerusalem. And what he finds in the temple are those who are selling oxen and sheep and doves and money changers seated at their tables. And this in and of itself is actually not a bad thing, because you've got about 500,000 people descending upon Jerusalem. It can be pretty impractical to carry a lamb a long distance, and so it would be really convenient to be able to purchase a lamb once you get there. A lot of folks would be carrying Roman money. The temple tax had to be paid in Tyrian shekels. Why Tyrian shekels? I chased that one. Turns out Tyrian shekel is made up of about 80% silver and was reliably minted and so people could trust the value of the coin, and so it could be spent pretty much anywhere, including outside of Rome. So it was a more tradable currency, so this is what they preferred for the paying of the temple tax. Okay, well, you've got to turn your Roman coins into a Tyrian shekel somewhere, and so having money changers there is actually a useful thing to have. But the problem is that they were doing it in the temple. And when we zoom out, this view is taken from the top of the Mount of Olives. We're looking down at Herod's temple, and there's absolutely no need for the money changers and for the livestock market to be actually on the temple platform. There's plenty of space around the Mount of Olives, and this is where it actually used to be done. It turns out Annas and then Caiaphas decided, no, we can move this into the temple, and it just makes it a whole lot easier for everybody. It was this that Jesus was objecting to, is that they had moved all of this stuff, which was useful to have, into the temple. Okay, well, why would that be a problem to move it into the temple? So it turns out that the market would get set up in the court of the Gentiles. So this is the place where everybody could go. There was a much smaller area that was restricted to those who were Jews. The court of the Gentiles is where Gentiles could come in and worship and pray for those Gentiles who were devoted to God. And the problem is that it's really hard to concentrate on what's going on with the worshiping and the praying when you're in the middle of a marketplace. And so Jesus came in and found himself in the middle of a marketplace and got mad because worship couldn't happen in such a place. There's also this potential for corruption. So master plan, this is along the lines of step 1, collect underpants, step 2, ? Step 3, profit. Step 1, declare outside animals blemished. Step 2, require purchase of priest-approved animals. Step 3, charge to 2 to 10 times the normal price. Step 4, profit. And the most obvious target in this was actually doves, selling the doves for the higher price, which is particularly offensive because the doves are those creatures that are purchased by the poorest of the poor. And so Jesus came in and saw exploit and he saw distraction, and he went and he made a scourge of cords. And I thought it was interesting that it notes this is a scourge of cords. Typically, scourge, you're going to have bits of like bone and glass and like shards of things, that nails that will create a whole heck of a lot of damage. And that's not what Jesus made. He made a scourge of cords, which gets called out. And so, notably, what we've got available to us is rope and rope and rope. And this is what Jesus takes in hand, and he drove them all out. And he poured out the coins. And he turned to the people who were exploiting the poor and said, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place, a business. And his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. And this was written in Psalm 69. Psalm 69, by the way, the same messianic psalm that notes that I will receive sour wine for my thirst. And we find out that because for your sake I have borne reproach, dishonor has covered my face. I have become estranged from my brothers, who, by the way, we're going to find out in a few chapters that Jesus' brothers don't believe in him, and an alien to my mother's sons. For zeal for your house has consumed me, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. So he drives them out because he cannot help it. The poor are being exploited. His Father's house is being turned into a business market. It's offensive, and so he clears the people out. And the Jews at this point, and remember, when we see the Jews, think leadership. Leadership then said to him, what sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things? This seems like a reasonable request. Like somebody has just come into a marketplace, fashioned a whip, and driven everybody out. He's grabbed tables full of money and chucked them. Leadership probably has a right to say, why do you think you can do this? At the same time, it's pretty interesting that they're saying, why do you think you can do this, instead of grab him? Yeah. Okay. So I think it's helpful at this point to push pause just for a moment, because we're going to see over and over and over again the Jews, leadership, saying, show me a sign, show me a sign, show me a sign, show me a sign. Reasonable request for him? It turns out, so let's go way back, and Moses talks to God in this burning bush and gets a message. Okay, you need to go download to your fellow brothers. And Moses says, but they're not going to believe me. Why in the world would they believe me? And God says, well, okay, you've got a serpent, right? And he says, sure. You've got a staff, right? Sure. Okay, well, throw it down. It's going to become a serpent. That's going to be pretty great. And why would you do that? That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Okay, so it's a sign that they can look at and believe, okay, God actually did give me this message. But Moses is like, okay, well, what if they don't believe that? Like, anybody can throw a staff down and have it turn into a serpent. Like, no. But Anyway, what if they don't believe that? He's like, okay, well, let me show you how you can make your hand leprous and then make your hand not leprous. Why would he do that? Well, that they may believe the witness of the last sign. Okay, so here's a sign, they'll believe you. What if they don't believe me? If they will not believe even these two signs, then here's what you do. You take some blood out of the Nile. You put the blood on the shore. Or you take some water out of the Nile. You put it on the shore. The water turns to blood. Presto, they're going to believe you. That's a sign. Okay, so we're starting to get accustomed to signs showing that, yes, in fact, God's involved in this endeavor. So a little while later, Aaron and Moses go to Pharaoh. Why in the world would Pharaoh believe? By this you shall know that I am the Lord. And how are they going to know? Well, he's going to turn the water everywhere into blood. Okay, we looked at that recently. Elijah. We've got these 400 prophets of Baal. And he's like, great, you do what you want to do to make your ox go up in flames. I'm going to douse mine in tons of water, and then I'm going to call to the Lord. And why would I do that? Let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. It is a sign that Elijah is right. Turns out Moses parting the Red Sea, what was the result? They believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. That was a sign. When there's the rebellion at Korah, Moses says, you know what? By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these deeds. If these guys die a natural death, wasn't me. If something totally new happens and the earth opens up and swallows all of them and their families and their possessions, then take that as a sign that I actually have been put in authority in the way that I've been acting. It's a sign. Gideon meets the angel of the Lord, and it's not until the angel of the Lord touches his staff to the food that Gideon brings him that it bursts into flames. He's like, oh, I have seen the Lord. It is a sign. Joshua, when he stops up the Jordan so that they can go across, why did he do this? By this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will assuredly dispossess from before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. It's a sign. So I just picked a few. You can go and look at time after time after time after time. God shows signs so that the person who's seeing the thing happen can believe it's really of God. So they come to Jesus and they say, show us a sign. By what authority are you doing this? And he gives them the cheekiest answer that I could ever imagine. Right? He's just like, destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll raise it up. And I can just see him like blink, 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 blink. Because they know at this point it took 1.5 years to build the temple, and then another 8.5 to finish the rest of Herod's temple platform. And then for the last 26 years on top of that, they've been going through and adding all of the decorative touches, and 36 years. And so at this point we're up to 46 years, which is over 16,500 days, which is more than 3, right? It's more than 3. So like, what in the world are you talking about? But this was a great response on Jesus's part, and why I say it's cheeky is because they say, give us a sign. And he's like, cool, tear down the temple, and then I'll show you my sign. And they're like, well, we're not going to do that. It's like, well, I guess you're not going to see a sign. So you sort of sidestep the whole endeavor. But the thing is that Jesus is the temple. So here's the grand reveal that the disciples will eventually connect, which raises the question, Okay, what was the difference between Herod's temple and Jesus' body? And the answer is God's Spirit did not dwell in Herod's temple. In fact, God's Spirit left the temple in Ezekiel, and it isn't going to get back in there till Revelation. And so his glory has gone, but they are standing before the radiant essence of God's glory, and he's saying, I'm the temple. Which we know because the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man, he was in the world and the world was made through him. And guess what? The world, which includes leadership, did not know him. So John knows what he's talking about. But this is the great part. He closes this with, so when he was raised from the dead, which we're at the beginning of his ministry, so 3+ years from now, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus has spoken. So Jesus drops this bomb, like, I am the temple. The bomb's got a 3-year fuse before anybody is going to experience this thing going off. And that's what we close the story with. Which raises a question. It raises so many questions, right? But I'm going to pick one of the threads and just, okay, so if God always gives these signs to people so that they'll understand the authority, why in the world did Jesus get so cheeky? Why did he not show them a sign? And I think the answer is best understood if you can understand the scale of the entire thing. And so let's do some market analysis. How big was the market that Jesus cleared? Animals purchased and sacrificed at the Passover. Josephus, who always exaggerates things, said that there were 255,600 lambs slaughtered at the Passover. He then backed into the number of people from that. People who have looked and analyzed, scholars generally think the number is actually lower. It's about 150,000 to 200,000. We're going to take the lowest of that range and say 150,000 lambs are slaughtered. You figure one lamb for every 10 to 12 people, but then you've got wealthy households who are going to sacrifice more than that. You've got people camping outside the walls as well. Okay, 150,000 lambs sacrificed. But we have other sacrifices going on. The more conservative scholars put a range of 10,000 to 30,000 doves would have been sacrificed at this time. We're going to pick the middle of that range, and then oxen and cattle, about 5,000. Why are oxen and cattle being sacrificed? Because people sin, and it's not only lamb sacrifices for Passover that are going to be occurring at this time. Okay, do we think that people brought in 150,000 lambs? No, absolutely not. Figure maybe half of them bought lambs on site. Okay, so we can start to make some guesstimates at how many animals in general were involved in this marketplace and how many were brought in. I want to put this into perspective for everybody here. If you've been to the National Western Stock Show up at the Denver Coliseum, they brag that about 15,000 animals will come through there. Looking at lambs alone at Passover sacrifices, we've got about 10 times that coming into Jerusalem. So all the animals that you see, like the cows, the bulls, the pigs, the sheep, the goats at National Western Stock Show, multiply those by 10. That's how many lambs we're talking about at being sacrificed during this time. Okay. How in the world, this raised the question for me, how in the world are you going to process 150,000 lambs? Because what's got to happen is you've got to inspect that thing to make sure that it's not blemished, that it's 1 year old. It's got to have the ritual cut pronouncement, yes, this is acceptable and is dead. You've got to have it drained of blood. You've got to have it packaged up for their dinner. Away they go. Turns out that you could actually do this in teams of 3. You've got a priest that is handling the inspection, the cut, and the pronouncement. He's got an assistant that he passes it off to while he then goes on to the next lamb. That assistant catches the blood, washes the animal, passes it off to the next assistant, who is then packaging this thing up for dinner. And you get that thing going in Henry Ford fashion. It's actually not crazy to think that one station could process through a lamb every 5 minutes. Just get that thing processed through. Okay, so to get through 150,000 lambs, that means you need over 1,000 of these stations. It starts to make you wonder, how much space do we have? Like, can we actually set up 1,000 stations with 3 people each station processing all of this? And so now it's time for us to dig into, okay, let's look at what this temple platform actually was. So Herod really wanted to create a legacy through a series of building projects, and his temple was crowning jewel. People were absolutely astounded. Like, there was so much gold on this thing that people, as they would come up toward Jerusalem, it would be the first thing that would appear on the horizon, and it looked like a snow-covered mountain because of the light reflecting off of it. Okay. Well, Herod had a little bit of a problem, and that problem was the dimensions for the temple were actually very specific and not really large by that era's standards for temples. And so you've got all these pagan temples that are huge, and then you've got this little holy temple. Okay, simple solution. He's going to build this grand thing around the temple. And so the overall temple platform covers 36 acres of land. 36 acres. Don't worry, we'll put that into perspective. But in the middle of this 36 acres of building structure, you have the tiny temple constructed according to exact dimensions. These folks did I feel like a really good job of building a model. I'm going to pause at a couple points in this just to point some stuff out. Based on archaeological evidence, what we've got, this is our best guess at what that temple might have looked like. Overall temple platform. This is the court of the Gentiles out here. Temple in the distance. I mean, it's really quite a structure. This is the women's court here, which is only Jewish women and men allowed that far. This area right over here is where those stations would have been set up normally. Just looking at square footage and doing some basic math, you could fit 24 stations in there. We need well over 1,000, so we're gonna have to spill out beyond just the core temple area. But with just 24 stations, you could actually process through about 8,000 animal sacrifices a day. So normal sort of daily sacrifice, yeah, the model holds up. Okay, so here is basic model layout, and I'm just gonna zoom in. Once you've got this picture, you've pretty much got the inner court where only the Jews can be, and then everything else is outer court, which is court of the Gentiles. I'm just gonna zoom in on this scale so that we can start to talk about it. And what we've got is the overall platform size, and we've got a football field laid out next to it. And so you can sort of get an idea, wow, it's really big. The court of the Gentiles, just that area. So the inner temple, inner courts area was a little over an acre in size, and so that leaves us 35 acres for the court of the Gentiles. So you could fit 27 football fields in there. Football fields little less than 1 1/3 acres. How many animals can you fit on a football field? Well, that becomes a difficult calculation for us, right? But we know the National Western Stock Show. And so I went on Google Maps and measured out Denver Coliseum. Turns out that the Coliseum itself is 2.8 acres, and so I've reduced it to scale size here, knowing that it's 2.8 acres and we've got 35 acres that we're playing with. We can actually fit 13 Denver Coliseums there. This works out really nice because we've got 10 times the animals and we've got 13 times the space, so we can fit all our animals there. Just to give people a visual, so nothing up my sleeve, I actually laid out 11 Coliseums on our platform here, and we've got a little space left over. I want to use that space here in a little bit. Remember our processing? Okay, well, think about a station that these three people would need. If we had 4 meters squared, so this is an area about 6 feet by 6 feet. You can picture, our fold-out tables that we put up for Erev Shabbat. That's about 3 feet by 6 feet. Take 2 of those, put those together. That's the space that you're working in. It's snug, but yeah, that's enough space, right? Okay, so with 4 meters squared, you only need about 1 acre of space to put enough stations to process 150,000 lambs. Okay, well, a football field is 1.3 acres, and so all we need is a football field worth of space. Well, look at all this space we've got left over. So we could totally put all the stations that we need. We've got 11 times the space for animal holding versus the National Western Stock Show. We've got 10 times the animals, so our animals fit there. We've got enough for, I don't know, probably 2,000 processing stations. This is not a problem. Logistically, it actually all works, and that was a great thing for me to see. I'm like, all right. But it also gives a different sort of scale to understand what we're talking about, because we're not talking about just a small amount of distraction for the people who are trying to worship. And for the people who are coming, like, it's a lot of noise. It's a lot of distraction. And when we talk about the potential for corruption, oh my goodness. Let's look at the lambs that are purchased. So we know from the records that a lamb is like 3.5 denarii. How much is a denarii? Well, it's a day's wage. If you look at an Uber driver makes about $12.50 an hour, you figure? Okay, so $100 a day, so a lamb is $350. When we're talking about purchasing 75,000 lambs, that's over $26 million in today's dollars of lambs being purchased in this marketplace. It's not a small place. When you talk about money changing hands, doing some basic back of envelope math, you've got 500,000 people, figure half of those are men, so 250,000, figure half of those, 125,000, are of age to have to pay temple tax. Figure like a little less than half of them have probably already paid it or will pay it, but a lot of them are going to pay it while they're here in town. You get 75,000 men paying tax, which is $15 million worth of temple tax in today's dollars. But then you add the lambs in, and you realize that you're talking about over $40 million of commerce going through the temple in this short period of time. Well, the people who are buying all of this stuff, they've got Roman coins, and so you figure maybe 70% of those transactions require local currency exchange, and you're talking about $29 million going through the hands of the money changers while they're turning Roman coins into Tyrian shekels. And they need to make a little bit on top of that, right? So you figure if they're charging 8% to do that, the money changers alone are pocketing almost $3 million on what's going on in this particular market. And all the calculations I've given are assuming fair market rates. And we know that they are charging more than fair market rates. So we're talking upon tens upon tens of millions of dollars going through this market, where once you add lambs together with doves, with oxen, you're talking over 100,000 animals being sold in this particular market. And Jesus drove them out. What? He drove all of them out with a rope. One man with a rope drove them out. And then leadership asked for a sign. Do you think people making tens of millions of dollars would walk out the door because of a man with a rope? But they did. And then leadership asked for a sign. Quick review, the last that anybody has heard from God at this point was from the prophet Malachi over 400 years before. And what he said is, behold, I'm going to send my messenger and he will clear the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a smelter and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, so that they may present to the Lord offerings in righteousness. That's the last they heard from God. Purifying the temple was the sign. One man with a rope cleared out 13 national Western stock shows and turned over their tables. And they asked for a sign. Okay. We have an appreciation for the scale that we're talking about here. Honest to goodness, I have no idea why this does not get called out. Here's a great question for you. Why didn't Jesus get in trouble? I have the answer to this. It wasn't his hour. See, this is his show, front to back. He's got 5 disciples on board. He needs to get 12 disciples on board. He needs them to walk with him for 3 years, to understand, to feel felt, to see what love looks like, so that they can carry his message. And then it will be Jesus' hour. It is not his hour now, so he did not get in trouble. Which leads to this